Welcome to a very casual Sunday Q&A with the entire Trainer Tips Pokemon family, and a tentacle kitty, which is not a Pokemon. There are a lot of questions that I want to answer this week. More questions than there are Pokemon that I have to evolve, so I'm just going to start by answering the first question right now. Do you think that there's anything to the Gen 2 Starbucks leak, or is it just a hoax? For those of you who aren't familiar, there was a leak from a supposed Starbucks employee that says Pokemon version 2 is coming on December 7th. It's supposed to line up with a promotion that Starbucks is having, and it also claims that Starbucks is going to have sponsored Pokestops. The leak came out while I was in Japan, and I didn't really have time to cover it because you guys know that was crazy hectic. I didn't have a lot of time while I was there. So I want to talk about it now because it's kind of a big deal. This is the first real, I wouldn't say concrete, but it's the first thing we've had pointing to a specific release date for second generation in Pokemon GO. And if you remember, if you've been watching the channel for a long time, I originally thought that Generation 2 would be released sometime during the holidays before Christmas. So if this Starbucks leak is true, that lines up with my initial thoughts on how Niantic would release future generations in Pokemon GO. There are obviously reasons to think that... Oh, it's raining. There are obviously reasons to think that it's not legit. For one, they say Pokemon, but think about how many adults or people in your life call it Pokemon because they just don't know. If this is a Starbucks employee or higher up who sent out this email who doesn't play Pokemon, it's perfectly understandable to think that they might call it Pokemon. Now, also, Pokemon version 2 doesn't necessarily mean Generation 2. It could just be a big update that's coming. It could be nothing at all. So I think that there could be some credibility to this leak. It does line up with my original expectation. The holidays are a perfect time for Niantic to release a huge update like second generation. It's going to bring a lot of people back to the game. And even though it's winter, a lot of people will be playing to catch these second generation Pokemon, which means a lot more sales in-game at a time when people are spending more money, when they have more disposable income during the holidays. So, marketing-wise, it's a perfect move. It's a perfect time to release second generation. I can't say whether or not it'll actually happen, but I do think this is a perfect time for Niantic to be thinking about releasing Generation 2. Especially with all the updates that they've been pushing out lately, it seems like they're really hitting their stride and picking up momentum as far as updates go. So, Generation 2, December 7th, definitely possible. Keep your fingers crossed, but don't hold your breath. Now, with that question answered, let's jump into the evolutions. I'm going to start with Goldeen, probably the least exciting out of all of these. Seaking did just get a slight nerf, very small nerf, less than 1% I think. So it's still really not a great Pokemon, but like I said, lots of questions, gotta evolve what I can. Poison Jab, Drill Run. I think that might be its best defensive moveset, actually. Here's a quick question that came up a lot during the Japan videos. Why do people wear masks there? And unlike other cities like Shanghai or Manila where people wear masks for pollution, in Japan and in lots of parts of Asia, those masks are used to prevent the spread of germs. People typically wear those not to protect themselves from other people's germs, but when they're sick, to protect other people from their germs. Like I said during the videos, it's a very considerate society, so if people are sick, if they have something that they know is contagious, but they still have to go out, they have to go to work, they have to go shopping, whatever, they'll put the mask on to prevent their germs from spreading to other people. Next evolution, let's do Doduo. Not very exciting, but Dodrio did just get a pretty decent buff. Still not going to be a great Pokemon, but it does actually have one of the higher attack stats in the game now, so that's good. Feint Attack, Air Cutter. I'm not sure how that stacks up, but there's another Dodrio. Next I want to address something that also came up during the Japan videos, and that's the use of third-party trackers. As you guys probably realized, we were being led around by Josh in Ishinomaki, who was using a tracker. Ben was also using a tracker there, and I've said many times on the channel that I personally don't use third-party trackers because it feels sort of like cheating to me. But with that said, I'm not completely opposed to it. I understand why people do use third-party trackers. it is very frustrating to wander around aimlessly trying to find a Pokemon that you really have no indication of where it is at all. So I do understand why people use them, and I wouldn't call anyone out for it. I wouldn't look down on anyone for using them. And when I'm in a foreign country and I'm there meeting up with people, I'm not going to just walk away from them because they're using trackers. It doesn't make sense. I wanted to stay with the group, I wanted to talk to people, and if they're using trackers, that's fine. The new nearby system that's rolling out is essentially a tracker, although it only tracks Pokemon near Pokestops, but still, it's telling you exactly where to go. So even Niantic feels that that's probably something that people want to know. And besides that, everyone that I talked to about the subject said that everyone in Japan uses third-party trackers. So it's sort of just part of the way that they play in Japan. I don't know what trackers they're using. I didn't ask. I don't know which ones are working over there, so I can't help you there. But pretty much everyone does use third-party trackers. In Japan, I don't personally use them. I don't look down on anyone for using them. So that's that. Let's do Cubone next. Marowak did get a very slight buff, about 2%, so really not a huge increase. But again, lots of questions, gotta evolve stuff. Plus I have a ton of candies still from the event, from the Halloween event, so I might as well use them. It's too bad it doesn't evolve into a Alolan Marowak. It looks so cool. Rock Smash, Bone Club. And it came from Japan, so that's a nice bonus. Is it true that they shut down the event on the 21st because of the waves that were about to hit the area? It is true. If you're not familiar, if you didn't hear, there was an earthquake in pretty much the same area just off the coast of Fukushima in Japan on the 21st. It actually happened just after I left. I think when I landed I found out about it. Reversal was still there. He said in Tokyo he felt the earthquake and it did wake him up. So it was a pretty big earthquake and there was a tsunami warning in effect. Some smaller waves did hit in Ishinomaki actually, where the main hub of the Lapras event was. I think it was about 80 centimeters, the wave that hit there, 1.4 meters in Sendai, and fortunately there weren't any deaths reported. There were some small injuries, and even waves that small are going to cause a lot of property damage, but thankfully everyone was safe. Niantic did end the Lapras event early because it would be pretty foolish to keep them there and try to keep people near the coast. There were evacuation orders in effect, so people were moving to higher ground. I did talk to some people who were still there for the event, and they said that they were evacuated to higher ground in Ishinomaki. So thankfully, not any deaths reported there. Some injuries, some property damage, but it wasn't anything like what it was in 2011. So, I mean, I can't say I'm happy about that, but I'm happy it wasn't worse. Next, I'll evolve Staryu, and before the CP changes, Starmie and Golduck were tied for the highest attack stat among Pokemon who learn Water Gun Hydro Pump. After the update, Golduck got nerfed, Starmie got buffed, and now Starmie is the strongest water-type attacker to learn Water Gun Hydro Pump. This one does not have either of those moves, unfortunately, but I do have another one with Water Gun Hydro Pump that I might power up as my offensive water type. Now, speaking of CP changes, how come some Pokemon, like Dragonite, got buffed, while the Pokemon that they evolved from got nerfed? The reason is the formula changed. They didn't change each specific Pokemon to make them stronger or weaker. They changed the formula that calculates a Pokemon's base stats using their original base stats from the games. So, as you remember previously, the formula equally valued both a Pokemon's special attack and special defense. So if a Pokemon was really high in one and really low in the other, it kind of got shafted and got a lower attack than it should have. If the Pokemon had even base stats, Pokemon like Arcanine or Victreebel or Exeggutor even, those Pokemon got the most benefit from that old formula, so they had the highest attack stats in Pokemon GO. With the changes to the formula, Niantic did something similar to what I suggested a few months ago, and they made it so that the formula values the higher of a Pokemon's 2 attack stats or defense stats. So for Pokemon with bigger gaps like Alakazam, who has very high special attack and very low attack, those Pokemon benefited the most from this change. The new formula is, let me read it to you, 2 times 7/8 times the higher of the 2 stats plus 1/8 of the lower of the 2 stats. So you can see the higher stat gets priority here. So in the case of Dragonite, it has much higher attack than special attack, so it did get a slight buff there. For Dragonair, its special attack and attack stats are closer together, so it actually got a little bit of a nerf. Guess what? I forgot my lucky egg, and during this double experience event, that's twice as important. I have 1, 2, 3 evolutions left. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to use the egg right now. I'll use the egg, and then after I evolve everything, I'll just do some extra filler evolutions. I do have more questions to answer anyway. Alright, next I'll do Tentacool. After this CP change, after the update, Tentacruel does have one of the highest defense stats in the game, so it is one of the better defensive Pokemon now, like it was originally intended to be. It had a good special defense stat in the original games. I'm not sure what its best defensive moveset is, though. I'm going to say Poison Jab and something else. Ooh, Poison Jab Hydro Pump. Nice. I gotta look that up. Sweet. Poison Jab Hydro Pump is the best offensive and defensive moveset for Tentacruel. Alright, more Japan questions. What sort of difficulties did you encounter with the language barrier, or were people pretty well versed in English? Actually, not a ton of people spoke English there, especially in the more rural areas where we were for the Lapras event. In the major metropolitan areas in Tokyo, obviously in the airport, sometimes in the bigger train stations, people did speak a fair amount of English, so that was okay. But in the rural areas, not a lot of English. I did take 1 semester of Japanese in college, so I wouldn't say I really know Japanese, but I do know enough phrases. I'm familiar with enough words to sort of help me get through interactions with people. It's nowhere near conversational. I do know how to ask if you speak English. I can ask about time, directions, sort of. So I'm familiar with enough Japanese that I could still communicate with people who didn't speak English. But people in Japan are so friendly and helpful that even if they don't speak English, they're willing to do as much as they can to help you understand or help you find out or get to where you're going. So the language barrier wasn't a huge problem. And then on top of that, I met so many amazing people out there, fans of the channel, people who do speak English, but they're living in Japan, so they were able to translate as well. Josh, obviously, was one of them, who has his own YouTube channel, which you should check out up here if you haven't already. So in the end, it really wasn't that difficult to get around in Japan. I think the hardest thing was missing trains, because at some of those smaller stations in the rural areas, they don't have English on the train signs like they do in the bigger stations. So that was part of the reason that it took us so long to find the right train, and part of the reason we got on the wrong train so many times. But in stations where there was someone there to help us out, we did try to ask as often as possible if we were getting on the right train. Google Translate is a huge help, even just for translating the names of stations from English letters into Japanese characters, so that helps a lot. But if you're worried about going to Japan and not speaking any Japanese, I really don't think that it's a huge issue, especially if you're going to stay in more tourist-friendly areas like Tokyo. I finally hatched a seal from an egg. It's not above 80%, and unfortunately, Dugong did just get nerfed. So I'm not as excited about this as I would have been a couple weeks ago, but it is from Japan. It is location stamped Ishinomaki, so hopefully I can get a decent moveset. Even though I now have a ton of Lapras as ice types, it's still nice to finally have a decent Dugong that doesn't even have a good ice type moveset. Has your degree in psychology influenced the way you make videos? If so, how? It definitely has, but my psych degree has also influenced just about everything in my life. I don't actually use the degree itself for my work, obviously, but I use a lot of what I learned in just about every interaction that I have with people, including these interactions here in the videos. Studying psychology, studying the human mind and how people work is immensely helpful in every single way that you interact with people. It helps you understand their motives, it helps you understand their desires, it helps you understand how to speak to certain people, how to address certain people, how to navigate around people's personalities. So I would say if you're going to school, if you're going to college, and you're undecided on what you want to study, try psychology. Even if you don't want to go into psychology as a profession, it's incredibly helpful no matter what you end up doing, because it helps you understand the people around you. Last real evolution for this set, and it's the one I'm most excited about. Alakazam is finally where it deserves to be, at the very top of offensive Pokemon, like it was intended, like I've been going on and on about for months here on the channel. It finally happened, and I don't want to take credit for it, but their formula is very similar to what I suggested. I'm really hoping for Psycho Cut, Psychic, but honestly Psycho Cut anything would be fine. Alakazam with Psycho Cut and Psychic is the strongest offensive Pokemon in the game, aside from Mewtwo. Let's see, no pressure Alakazam. Dang. I already have one with Confusion Psychic. That's actually its second best moveset. Confusion Psychic, it's its best defensive moveset, so I do have two Alakazams with a good defensive and still a good offensive moveset. So, totally okay with that. Okay, here's an interesting one. It's not really a question, but it is something that got a lot of traction in the comments recently. Please put ads on your video. I wouldn't mind spending an extra 5 to 30 seconds if it means supporting you. My videos are monetized. Sometimes you might not see them because YouTube does decide who to show ads to and what ads to show you. But my videos are monetized. There should be one ad at the beginning of every video. I don't want to add more than that. I don't want to add mid-rolls. But something that Reversal suggested to me that I want to run by you guys is placing an ad at the end of a video. After all the content, after the end cards, an ad at the very end. So those of you who do want to support the channel more can stay through that ad. For those of you who don't want to watch ads, it doesn't affect you at all because it doesn't interrupt any of the content. So that's something I'm considering. Please let me know if that's something you guys would be okay with. If that's something that you hate, absolutely hate the idea of, let me know. And I am going to be starting that Patreon soon, so if you do want to contribute in other ways, you'll be able to do that very soon. Just stay tuned to the channel. I'll announce that once I get it all set up. I'm just going to start evolving Pidgeys for experience, and we'll continue answering these questions. Where do you plan to travel next for the channel? Well, obviously there are still 2 more region exclusives that I need to catch. Mr. Mime in Europe, and Kangaskhan in Australia. So those are obviously the 2 destinations that I really do need to visit for the channel. Unfortunately, I don't really have as much interest in visiting the Western world as I do parts of Asia, South America even. I'm far more interested in visiting the developing world than I am really the first world. And I know Japan is a first world country, but being part of Asia, it's far more interesting to me. Now, that said, I do want to visit Spain. That's high on the list. I do want to see Berlin is a city I'd like to visit, Budapest. So there are parts of Europe that I definitely do want to visit, and if I do go to Europe, I'll probably make a whole trip out of that and take at least a couple weeks and travel around to different parts of Europe, probably visit Reversal in the Netherlands. And then for Australia, I do have family in Australia that I'd like to visit, so that trip is definitely coming too. So I know that doesn't really answer the question as to what my next destination is. It gives you an idea of what I'm doing to get the region exclusives, but there are also other places that I'd like to visit even more so. At the top of my list would definitely be a lot of South America. Morocco is a country I've wanted to visit for a long time. Somewhere in the Middle East. I know it's very dangerous and conflict-ridden in a lot of parts over there, but that's something I'd actually like to see. And then Southeast Asia, Thailand, I'd like to go back to the Philippines. There are a lot of places that I want to travel, and obviously I'll be bringing you guys along, but for next destination, it'll probably be Australia, and then Europe once it gets warmer over there. Here's a question. Don't you have to save some for regarding the money that we're donating to the organizations that are helping the Tohoku region? I talked to a few people, some people who are well-versed in these kinds of things, and it is a concern, but it seems more than likely I'll be able to write this off, obviously, as a tax write-off for contributing to charitable organizations, but also the money that was donated can be considered gifts. Money that was gifted to me from people, so I don't have to pay taxes on gifts if I declare it that way. if when it comes down to it and I do file my taxes, if I have to pay taxes on the money that was donated, I can do that out of my own pocket. I think I'm putting aside more than I need to for taxes, but that's just to be safe. So I should have a buffer there. If it comes down to it, I can pay taxes on it, but more than likely I'm not going to have to do that. So that's good. Okay, here's something I wanted to talk about. I'm just going to read it to you because it's kind of a long one. Just asking, could you do a video or a few on travel tips? I'm someone with some anxiety issues, but would love to travel to places like Japan. However, seeing the way in which you traversed with no one else around you was inspirational, and made me want to do the Euro trip I've been putting off for years. Thanks for the inspiration and positivity. So I just kind of want to talk about travel. I know I'm probably not qualified to give travel tips. I did miss a lot of trains. I missed a flight. So my first tip would be on time, be familiar with your schedule. But the second thing is, as far as missing trains goes, that's something I'm okay with doing. If I'm exploring a place that I've never been before, I would much rather see a little bit more of that place and just take the next train. It's not really a huge deal to me. Now, the whole time in Japan, I did feel pressed for time, so I felt like I was rushing the entire time, and I think that probably came across in the videos. I did seem kind of flustered because it was such a short trip, and there was so much that I felt like I needed to accomplish, so much that I needed to see, to share with you, to try to spend that money. It was a very difficult situation, difficult circumstances to travel under. Typically when I travel, I like to just go with the flow. I like to be free and open to do whatever comes up. So I think that's probably one of the most important things when you're traveling, is to just be okay with not sticking to your plan. It's cool to plan, but I'm not really the type of person to plan out my entire day down to the minute. I'm much more of a go with the flow type of person, and I think that's important. And as far as anxiety goes, I do actually get a little bit of anxiety sometimes. I get nervous when I'm traveling to new places. But if you're just open to the experience, it makes things a lot easier. Obviously, some amount of preparation is required. You should familiarize yourself with customs and cultural things there. Like, for instance, in Japan, tipping, not okay. It's considered rude. It's polite to hand things and take things from people with two hands. So if you just familiarize yourself with stuff like that, people will view you a lot less as a foreigner because they see that you're sort of familiar with their customs, and I think that helps in their perception of you as a person. But I guess my biggest tip is really just go for it. There's no reason not to. If you get lost in a foreign country, you get lost in a foreign country. It's not the end of the world. You'll find your way back eventually. You'll find people who are willing to help you. Unless you're traveling to somewhere that's super dangerous, you're really going to be okay walking around solo in a foreign country. And that's actually the way I prefer to do it. I mean, I really enjoyed being with the group and being with people and experiencing this together, but I feel so much more free to just do what I want to do, experience what I want to experience. I like not having to worry about taking up anyone else's time. If I want to stop at a cemetery for an hour and just experience that, that's fine. I know that other people that I was with probably wouldn't have wanted to do the same thing, but for me, I like having that freedom. So traveling alone is actually better for me, in my opinion. Over the summer last year, I actually did a 1-month road trip where I bought a van, an old van, put a bed in it, put some storage, some whatever, and I lived in the van for a month and traveled up the west coast of the United States, starting in San Diego. I went all the way up, stopped and stayed with family for a little bit in Oregon for a family reunion there, continued on to Seattle, Bellingham, Washington, which is one of my favorite cities in the world because of that trip, and then across the border into Canada to Vancouver. I ran out of money there and had to turn around, unfortunately. But that was one of the best experiences of my life, and I did it all completely solo, just meeting people in the places that I went to, having them show me around a little bit, share a little bit of the culture, tell me about the city. But for the most part, I was entirely alone. And when I'm traveling, sometimes that's the way I like it. So yeah, I think I kind of rambled on that, but I hope that helps. I hope that kind of inspires some confidence in some of you who might be looking to travel, just go for it. Really, it's going to add so much to your life. Just being in new places, experiencing new things, being around different people, different sites, it affects the way that you think more than you realize. If you're walking through the same places all the time, seeing the same things, being around the same people, it sort of gets into this routine, and when you switch that up, it can switch up the way you think about things, and it can unlock things in your mind and inspire things in you that you might not have gotten otherwise. Oh, actually, here's a question that I wanted to address earlier. I have a 1200 CP ride-on, but with a 100% IV. Should I invest in a power-up, or is it too low that a power-up makes sense? With Rhydon, I would say it's probably worth powering up, especially with Rhydon being one of the top 5 Pokemon now. So when you have 100% perfect IVs on a Pokemon that has high CP to begin with, that's pretty important to power up. And I'm actually going to do that now. That's something I wanted to do. Now that I've run out of filler evolutions, I'm going to power up some of my perfect IV Pokemon right now. Starting with my perfect IV Rhydon. Even though it doesn't have the best moveset, powering this up will mean it has very high CP, it's going to be placed higher in gyms, and if I have enough Stardust to power this up completely, it's going to make it into my top 3 Pokemon, for sure. Wow. It's going to go beyond my top 3 and make it to the top spot. Is that it? That's all the way. 2782. Yep. 1 CP higher than my Snorlax. And this Snorlax is maxed out. So even though Snorlax does have higher max CP than Rhydon, because my Rhydon has better IVs, at the same level here, my Rhydon is higher CP than my Snorlax. 86,000, what else do I want to do? My Slowbro's maxed out, but he just got a little bit of a nerf. I haven't powered up my perfect IV Vaporeon in a while, not since the moveset changes that made Water Pulse obsolete offensively. But I will power this up for defensive purposes, since Vaporeon is also a top 5-ish, top 5 Pokemon. Yep, all the way. 2661. Now let's talk about how low is too low to power up. I do have my perfect IV Snorlax. Snacks, actually. This guy right here. There he is. Perfect IVs, 958 CP, and not really the best defensive moveset, but I do eventually want to power him up. I just think right now, other things take priority over this. Especially because Lick is not the best move defensively. He doesn't make the best defender. Don't worry, buddy, you're still great. Eventually I will power this up, but if you have perfect IV Pokemon with low CP, and they have low maximum CP, they might not really be worth it. But if it's something like Rhydon, something like Snorlax that's going to be high CP at the end, I would say go for it. Especially right now during this event when you can replenish Stardust twice as quick. So that's it. I think that's it for this Q&A. Lots of questions. I hope you guys learned something. I hope this was helpful. And I really hope that I've inspired some of you to get out and travel. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Oh, I can't reach.